Welcome back to another episode of This Book Blends Brain Cells. I'm Adam. I'm dead
I'm
inside.
at, I'm Alabaster, and I'm still here, thanks to the ruinous powers that I made a compact.
Fuck that. Zinch created this book and you know it.
This is the work of no. This book is so disgusting and vile that it has to be the work of nerd.
Uh, uh, Both of you are forgetting the obvious. It drives people to angry madness. Who does that benefit? Corn.
There's a problem with that. I don't think Korn can read.
What
He's just
these methods? Angry smush.
well. Anyway, after we've sold our souls to the ruinous powers, how about we get on with continuing to power through this?
Oh, and the last person here is Randall. So let's get into this Signal Kills Fascist, which opens up with a rip-off scene of Logan, but with the Nazi from American History X and the one from Raiders of the Lost Ark if they had a love child. Oh, and not Chun-Li, too.
Not Chung Li's having her back like shattered in two and her elbows distorted and all sorts of funky.
My favorite thing is whack-ass Robo-Leg because it has the same angry eyes as angry android ass.
It does. It's got the stanky leg going on.
Uh, I also love
Adam,
the...
go ahead.
I was just going to say I also love the very blurred, minimal effort building drawings, but if you want me to read on, I can.
Let's power through this.
Yeah. So Insurgency is theater, which just brings to mind ISIS on ice.
Go, Abdul! Wear the sequins! You must dance! Dance! Dance your heart out!
Hamid, you are not supposed to start off the suicide vests until the finale. It is the only way we could get fireworks into the studio. How did a camel get onto the ice rink?
I know. I didn't order that camel. I didn't have that. I did not want Arabian camels. I wanted Bactrian camels. Damn it! This is unacceptable.
It is ruining my vision!
Coming to theaters in 2021. So, in the AMC show, I already don't care. Turn Washington Spies, a period piece about military intelligence during the American Revolutionary War. There is a powerful scene where General Washington is confronted by an angry Benjamin Talmadge, his spy master. Earlier, Talmadge had delivered evidence that some of Washington's key generals were conspiring against him and no longer loyal to the revolution. While this segment here is delivering evidence that Chad Walker was watching this show and wanted to brag about his knowledge that he gained from watching this show on AMC. Yet Washington did nothing about the traitors in their midst, and Talmadge, furious, demanded to know why. Washington explained to Talmadge that an alliance with France was vital to winning the war, but to win them over, he had to ensure that the American resistance looked unified, orderly, and capable of winning, when in reality, the only thing the French gave a crap about was if they were capable of winning. That's why they didn't join the war until Ticonderoga. Hanging his generals, even those who might be traitors, would shatter that perception, even though, if they are traitors, you probably want to keep them as far away from command as possible.
Also, if you're not taking care of traitors, doesn't that make you look blitheringly incompetent that you have like a million holes in your military intelligence?
Insurgency is theater!
Which, it's also hilarious because this is essentially Chad Walker accidentally admitting that he sees terrorism as a fun play, which is disgusting.
I really fear that this is what I feel that that he's had. I feel like that he does have through through various Homeland Security that Chad Walker's had more than a few visits.
Oh god, yeah. So hanging his generals, even those who might be traitors. Oh, I already read that. That is why he sat on Talmadge's intelligence to win the war. This scene is a beautiful example of how the insurgency is theater, Both the local population and the international community are watching every move an insurgency makes and determining by their actions whether or not it's a cause worth supporting. Not really. Usually what happens is it becomes a big deal for like 2 weeks and then people forget about it. Case in point, Syria, 85% of the time. An insurgency that wins over both the local population and the international community will win the war. When the people rise against a regime and they are bolstered by the solidarity of foreign allies, that regime is living on borrowed time. General Washington understood this and prevailed. However, the reverse is also true. A regime that can turn the people in the international community against an insurgency will rule in perpetuity. Bashar al-Assad, the tyrant of Syria, understood this.
Oh boy, who wants to read this?
Assad, facing massive popular uprisings during the Arab Spring. Inspired by events that were happening in nearby countries, thousands of peaceful protesters took to the street denouncing the brutality and the corruption of his regime. Assad's Assad's response only proved the legitimacy of the people's reclaims. A handful of teens were arrested and then tortured for spray painting anti-government graffiti. Unarmed protesters were shot and killed by loyalist security forces. These aggressions incensed the people, who were in turn turned up arms to defend themselves. Soon they were supported by many military defectors who renounced the Assad regime, transforming a democratic movement into a legitimate armed insurgency, quote unquote.
Especially
With
given how quickly they split apart.
also, we put legitimate, backed by certain Western powers, of course.
Yeah, like
Let's not
half of them.
forget.
Oh,
With the
there's one more
with
thing I want to highlight. This entire section so far is just Chad bragging about the stupid shit he looked up.
with people
Can read Wikipedia.
with the people united against him and the international community caught up in the revolutionary fervor of the Arab Spring, Assad's grip on power was slipping. Yeah, this book is so timely. To create a political space for a Russian military intervention on his half, he needed to find his way to alienate and isolate the insurgency, to cast doubt on its
He
legitimacy.
doesn't need to do
Radical
any of
Islamic
that.
terrorism is just what he needed.
He
I
does.
like that's in quotes. I love that it's in quotes.
Radical Islamic terrorism, quote unquote.
I'm sorry I shouted over you that one bit, but he didn't need any of that because Russia supporting Syria, that just makes strategic sense because hey, Russia's whole thing is anti-West. So keeping an anti-Western guy in the Middle East kind of benefits them.
I'll grab this next section. Assad's regime was adept at creating and enabling violent radicals. They had been doing so for years to disrupt American military occupation in Iraq and Afghanistan. The ones that outlived their usefulness or turned their extremism against the state were locked up in Syrian prisons. During the tumult of the Arab Spring, Assad ordered their release. The hopes was that these violent radicals, driven into frenzy by ideology and years of abuse, would go out and inflict carnage throughout Syria. To add fuel to the fire, the regime even looked the other way as Al Qaeda fighters began to cross their borders to join their brothers in arms. But wait, Al Qaeda hates ISIS.
They do.
ISIS was born, and the West was horrified. The ensuing violence and ISIS co-option of the democratic movement was as predictable as it was preventable, but it was part of Assad's grand strategy. The regime was then able to point at the activities of these extremists and blame the insurgency. The world community bought the story hook, line, and sinker.
What? That is holy shit. That is some. So is he saying that ISIL didn't do nothing?
Oh no, they're saying that ISIL was all caused by Bashir al-Assad, and
No,
he
it's
was
not
not.
like those insurgents were just waiting for the moment to. It's not like there was like a Islamic fundamentalist in his own country that were just waiting for a moment of crises to try to take power. Not at all.
Or
It's all
I
Assad's fault.
I was going to say or also, it's not like this violent reaction against the government's excesses causes a bunch of factions to unify for a bit and then they realize how much they fucking hate each other and then they split up. And last but not least, this is something that neither of you noticed. Chad's actually describing Bashir al-Assad as a political genius. Based on what he wrote, he highlighted that this guy knew what he was doing the entire time.
I'm
Wait,
gonna
wait, wait,
cut
wait,
that
wait.
one there.
In Syria, did it have the crazy amount of? Does it have? Is it a Islamic country that suffers from a lot of incest?
It's an Islamic country that has a fuck ton of minorities in it. Not
Oh
just
God.
ethnicities, but religious minorities. Like, to give you an idea, Assad is what you call a member of the Druze community, which is related to Islam, but it's somewhat different. It's a more universalist concept. Then you have your Shia and Sunnis. You have Christians there too, by the way. And you even have the Yazidi communities. And let's not forget there's Kurds, there are Assyrians, there are Levantine Arabs. You have a fuck ton of
Oh,
people that
it
will
sounded
hate each other due to
it's
how.
how.
Go on.
So he tends. So Chad is what you said. He simply ignored the fact that already it was a powder keg waiting to explode.
Syria is the Muslim world's equivalent of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, but if the Austrians actually made up at least sort of a majority in terms of ethnics, in terms of religion, it gets a lot more of a. It turns into a complete shit show, though.
Anyway, pressing on from Bashir al-Assad, tactical genius, Russia quickly entered the war under the pretense of defeating the newly formed ISIL, but nearly all their military operations targeted the population centers, hospitals, and bases of the anti-Assad insurgency. The United States, exhausted from a decade of fruitless nation building and military adventure, which helped create the power vacuum that led to the rise of ISIL. Nice going there, Chad. Immediately seized on Assad's narrative as a convenient excuse to recuse themselves from the conflict.
By the way, he's
Yeah.
also forgetting one more thing. Chad is technically right in that Russia joined the war. I'm putting that in so many quotes, it's not even funny. But really, it's just what Russia did as early as the Soviet Union, where they just sent volunteers, or in this case, mercenaries. Like, they're not officially armed Russian soldiers. Officially. Unofficially, they kind of are, but it's more like Russia loans out. Hey, Bashir, you wish to have a couple companies of Spetsnaz, yes? Oh, yes, yes. Use them to completely slaughter these pigs. Well, yes, we will do that in exchange for X amount of tons of oil or gold bullion. Either or.
Also, Russia wants to keep their port, wants to keep a partners with having a port in the Mediterranean, no problem as well. So
Yeah, that's
that's
another
kind of
thing. Russia, since the 1700s, have been craving a warm water port that avoids the Strait of Marmara, i.e., they don't want to deal with that Turkish able to blockade the Black Sea bullshit.
Uh, Continuing on, in one of the most craven moments in modern geopolitics, American politicians cries, "I need to stop arming the terrorists," while the men, women, and children of Aleppo were being blown to pieces by a Russian-backed Syrian air force. Remember when Gary Johnson was like, "Wait, what's Aleppo?"
Hey, remember when
Um,
Obama drone bombed a bunch of people in Syria
Pakistan as well.
and Yemen?
Yeah, and often ended up inadvertently killing civilians because, well, fuck, I don't know.
Hey, don't
Remember
we
Obama's
don't
red
accuse.
line?
Yes, the red line that he did jack shit about.
No, he
Then
did
again,
stuff, but compared to Trump, it was nowhere near as firm.
When Bad Orange Man was more successful in fucking Syria than Obama. Oh yeah, and I also noticed that the narrative is now that interventionism and playing world police is good. Good when the Republicans were doing it, I guess, but Assad was able to degrade and kill the signal
Fuck you. Fuck you,
long enough
Chad.
long enough to reestablish order, but it remains to be seen if it will be reborn. One thing is for certain, however, Assad's brutal regime is not a defense against radicalization. It is the engine of radicalization.
Wait. I thought it was his regime that was the only thing that was really keeping the crazy ass radicals down. Anyway,
No, engine of radicalization.
Nowadays it kind of is, but back in the day, like right when Chad was writing this, it wasn't seen as so bad. It's when the factions that formed the Democratic Front splintered like fucking balsa wood that you got to see that a good chunk of them were fucking nuts. So, Sigmata explores the
Adam?
concept of an insurgency vying for and fighting for the support of both the people and the international community in the face of a regime who is also doing the same. All violence is political. Oh. If a military or political operation is not actively gaining and strengthening the support of the people in the international community, it does not matter regardless of the outcome.
oh
Chad
my god,
Walker, armchair general that would get an F in an armchair general convention.
I think we're better. I think all of us inept assholes would probably be better armchair generals than this exceptional fat.
I blow loads in Hearts of Iron 4. I'm really bad. Like, to give you an idea, I'm basically AI France in a nutshell. On defense, I'm okay, but as soon as a hole opens up, oh shit.
All I know as an EU4 is that when I'm playing as Byzantium, all I know is that blocking this that the Turks can't do shit if I block the strait.
As Italy, I managed to lose a war to Saudi Arabia.
Hey, you're playing Italy correctly.
Yeah, he did. At least I could say that I have won the game a couple of times as the Soviets and Germany, so I'm not awful. I'm just not good. So
Anyway, let's
See,
get down to the important things. The strategy.
oh god.
There are three types of insurgency strategies: the guerrilla warfare strategy, the conventional warfare strategy, and the punishment strategy. I would assume there's more strategies than that, you tard. Before discussing guerrilla warfare, the strategy the resistance has selected, we'll briefly discuss conventional warfare and punishments and why they're not tenable paths to victory. It's important to understand these less effective strategies because there are members of the resistance that advocate for them anytime the movement. Conventional warfare is a great strat. Conventional warfare is usually a great strategy. You tard.
Conventional warfare is what you do when you're actually fighting a legit war. Like in this case, guerrilla warfare works because they're playing an insurgency. It's not like an actual civil war because Chad's a moron and didn't have an actual civil war. Like it's a civil war, yes, but it's more like FARC or your standard Latin American trouble with the banditos of terrorist groups slash political revolutionaries sort of thing, rather than an actual civil war.
so yeah, we're at FARC level, and we want to be up at NVA level.
Or at the very least, or hell, since it's the American Civil War, do Electric Boogaloo Confederate level.
But the Confederates were the bad guys, so we can't make comparisons to the bad guys. Only the good
Oh
guys.
yeah, I forgot. Chad, yeah, NVA because, hey, that way Chad can accidentally reveal he loves Uncle Ho.
Also, Chad would never know that the Confederate side had two regiments of Cherokees because the Cherokees love their slaves.
God, yeah.
So, by the way, I feel really glad that Biggie's not here because he'd be screaming that we're still not in the crunch, even though I thought we were supposed to be in the fucking crunch. So,
For
conventional warfare. Conventional warfare strategy is essentially civil war between resistance military units and regime military units. Both sides conquer and hold land and attack each other's military industrial bases and supply lines and attempt to win decisive victories on the battlefield until one side is exhausted and concedes defeat. This is Chad revealing he doesn't actually know what conventional warfare is, but okay. Conventional warfare strategy only makes sense if the insurgency has military power equal to or greater than the state. Not necessarily. It depends on what tactics you use.
Yeah.
What your strategy is, what your end goal is too. Like to give you an idea, the Germans as a whole were very effective tactically in World War II. But the problem was they had garbage operationals, which is your supply and planning, and awful strategies because they had goals, but they didn't really have the steps needed to reach those goals.
Also, keeping supply. Um,
Logistics and
people,
operations, yeah.
logistics can be easily one of the most important things to keep with that, because you can have the greatest plans in the world, but if you don't have the ability to eat, to feed, clothe, and to provide ammo for your soldiers, you have nothing.
I'm reminded of one of my favorite quotes from that period in the war. I think it was von Manstein that said it. The vastness of Russia devours us. They did not plan for how hideously huge Russia was when they advanced into it during Barbarossa. And they also did not plan ahead. They did not realize that the roads that the Russians were bragging about were like little dirt roads because they haven't fully industrialized yet. So
Yeah,
as soon as the rainy season began, the Russians actually have a term called the Rasputitsa or general mud. Yeah, the roads turned to complete goo and they were stuck.
I'm just imagining like Hitler looking at a globe. He's like, "Oh no, no, Moscow is very close, close. See, I can. It's like my finger. It will be fine."
Meanwhile, you have von Manstein drowning in like 5 feet of mud, screaming, "Avenge me!"
Meanwhile, you have Rolf sent there, just a normal German person. It's like, I made a mistake. I made a terrible mistake.
Where were we? Something about, oh, if they have equal or greater than the state. It is for this reason that a conventional warfare strategy is completely out of the question for the resistance. That is, if you plan warfare like Chad Walker. The resistance has no shortage of soldiers and small arms. Based on the fact that they're operating more like the Viet Cong slash FARC, yeah, they do. They clearly do. But the regime has the awesome power of the freedom fries. You mean the Paul Blarts? Because they're half police force, half army, all shit. And the all supporting branches of what used to be the US military, including the Air Force and Navy. No matter how many.
No,
Yeah,
no, he's forgetting the most deadly branch, the Coast Guard.
hilariously, the Coast Guard would be more effective in the Civil War than the Navy because they have riverine boats. I know the Navy does too, to a degree, but we don't really we don't really need patrol boats that often to cross the rivers.
Oh, have you seen even any of those videos where the Coast Guard just goes to pace those drug running boats? It's pretty cool.
Yeah,
Pretty cool stuff.
like the Coast Guard hilariously would be more effective in this war than the Navy would be.
Can we play it? You know what though? Can Biggie? Can if we do another thing with Sigmata? I hope we play as Coast Guards going to fight these resistance people.
So Paul Blarts as Coast Guards, I love it.
Yes,
Paul Blarts, but we have like turn of the century sailor suits on.
yes.
So no matter how many soldiers and stolen military vehicles they muster, the resistance will always lose a stand-up fight with the regime.
That doesn't. What? There's been many times in history where in a conventional war where numerically outnumbered armies were managed to win the battle, sometimes spectacularly.
If
What
I remember
about
right, didn't the Germans during Operation Sickle Cut have a severe numbers disadvantage in tank and men? Because they were dealing with the British, French, and Belgian army when they punched through the Ardennes. I
what
seem
about also another great battle was the Battle of War of 1812, the Battle of New Orleans. I think they the U.S. United States did not have a lot of traditional military men. I think most of they were made up of militia pirates, and they were outnumbered against the British like 2 or 3 to 1, and won that fight.
Look at Robert E. Lee. The army of Virginia was always usually outnumbered by the army of the Potomac, and yet he was able to make fools out of several generals before they finally settled on Grant.
But no, this isn't big brain, galaxy size IQ Chad's understanding. You just gotta have a bunch of people and throw them at the enemy, and you'll just win through numbers.
Oh God, he's doing the Soviet human wave method.
I,
Disgusting.
lear- I learned it in StarCraft.
Also, with the human wave method, though, the problem you have with that is that once you're done with the war, who's going to have left to build the shit to rebuild?
Um, um, but it works. It works, and it's the best big brain IQ
Didn't
strategy.
didn't do the human wave method like after the gulags and whatnot. Didn't the Soviets like lose like 25% of their people?
There's a reason why why the former Soviet Union states all have a population decline problem. So I think we're on punishment strategy. I can keep going, but if anyone else wants to, I'm not going to
I'll
stop
grab
them.
this. Gotta keep us on track. A punishment strategy is a campaign of terror where the resistance targets and punishes the population that remains loyal to the regime. The,
That they
insur-
do.
the insurgency commits atrocities such as mass murder, kidnapping, torture, assassination, mutilation, light whipping, dirty talk, and humiliation against loyalist supporters, politicians, media personalities, and soldiers on leave. The goal is to convince the loyalist population that regime cannot protect them, while also forcing the state to strangle the loyalist population with severe security measures. The regime is then in a race against time. It must root out and destroy the insurgency before it goes bankrupt, or before the terrified population demands the state cede to the insurgents' demand. While many in the resistance advocate for this strategy, especially those who have suffered the regime's own atrocities, it was ultimately rejected, for it is nearly impossible to parse the actual loyalists from those coerced into collaborating with the regime.
So basically, this is Chad saying, "Fuck you. You have to play exactly the way I want you to."
Pretty much.
As for the punishment strategy, that also occasionally has value. I mean, after all, just to use Warhammer 40k, that's literally how Conrad Curse did his conquests. And
But that's 40K, not real life.
in real life, Vlad the Impaler was very successful with punishment strategies to the point where the Turks refused to fucking attack him until he died.
And Genghis Khan, probably the most famous of all.
Took a lot of cities that way. Oh, I have a conventional warfare moment that actually was a strategic victory. By the way, just to fuck you, Chad. The Tet Offensive. Yeah, that was a tactical fucking blunder that killed a lot of Viet Cong, but it also was the reason why we got out of Vietnam because of the casualties.
Al, I think it's your turn to read.
Yep, guerrilla warfare, not guerrilla or whatever.
Guerrilla warfare strategy, which the resistance has adopted as their own, is where an insurgency uses intimate regional knowledge, the support of local sympathizers, and the mobility of smaller numbers to perform hit and run maneuvers against the regime's much larger and slower force. Basically, they're running circles around Paul Blart's motor scooter.
Also, this is called irregular warfare too. Yeah, just because
Asymmetric
asymmetric's
warfare.
also another term for it.
Or if you want to be like that Victoria guy, fifth generational warfare.
William. That
It's
should
gonna
be something we read one day.
the Christian Marines are gonna take over New England and restore it to true American values. And also ban all technology that wasn't made before 1930.
Don't forget his weird fetishization of the German tactical victories in World War II.
Oh
Or
no.
trains. He loves trains. We stopped supporting trains and the nation went into decline. We need to build more rails.
Oh, by the way, I know how to counter this strategy because the Chinese almost killed Mao this way. Ever heard of the blockhouse strategy?
Not really.
Okay, blockhouse strategy is essentially you just throw it's the same thing as a surge. You just throw so many fucking men that there is nothing to hide from because there are just so many dudes in that area, you can't escape. That almost killed. The
Hmm.
reason the Long March actually happened was because Chiang Kai-shek used that to great success, and I believe it was the not Jiangsu, it's the oh shit, I don't. It's around like the Lake Pohai area, I think, like west of Fujian province. Basically, that's they had their Jiangxi Soviet. That's what it was called. They used the blockhouse to crush that like a fucking bug, and only like 5,000 guys got out of it, including
Yeah,
Mao.
sometimes there is the thing is Chad Walker's forgetting sometimes you need multiples to win a war. You multiple strategy types need to be employed or can be employed.
Yeah,
No,
like,
guerrilla insurgency is the only way.
and then you respond by just throwing. Oh yeah, we pulled out most of our troops from not Afghanistan. Have fun with this troop surge, you fucking terrorists.
Also, like I said, why not why wouldn't the why don't you do minor insurgencies? Then when the resistance feels confident, they go for a surge strategy on a major military installation to show support that these resistance members has what it takes and possibly get outside funding from foreign powers and
So
whatnot.
a Tet offensive slash Ticonderoga sort of thing.
Uh, it's because Chad's only reference for military tactics when writing this was AMC.
That is the saddest thing I've ever heard.
But let's finish this off. A guerrilla insurgency chooses its battles very carefully, only committing to confrontation when the odds are in its favor. Its members hide in remote regions or within population centers because taking and holding territory or mustering forces in any one place would make it easily crushed through conventional means. The goal of this strategy is to harass the regime so often and over such a long period of time that it diminishes the freedom first for morale, compels them to stay hidden in the safety of bunkers and APCs, further isolating them and alienating them from the population, and forces them into a strategy that is so defensive it cannot effectively achieve the regime's goals. All while the insurgency bolsters its popular and international support. Of course, it requires that the insurgency survives its campaign long enough to see it
You
through.
Well, my
can't
question
win.
is,
That's Chad
what if?
saying you can't win.
So the thing is, though, what if the regime was like, "Fuck it," and we're just gonna go to get rid of the insurgency. We're just gonna go firebomb. We're gonna go firebomb Saint. We're going to level Saint. If there was a major regime amount of places, we'll give you one shot, and they just like level St. Louis to the ground. I mean, that's always available.
Like I said, blockhouse strategy. He could also just take all of the receivers, or as they call them, jammers in their employ, since they are the majority, pull them from espionage duties, and just fucking unload all of them.
Also, psyops, just get like a few psyops. They find one place, and then, or they could try to make a false place to get to force the regime, to force the resistance into a massive confrontation, to where it's going to be a massive trap for them.
Essentially, the idea is if they're going to play that game, you either throw so many things at them they cannot dodge it, or you lead them into thinking they're winning and then pull them into an ambush.
Yeah, like for example, or go with that. I know it's Sun Tzu's Book of Obvious. Leave a target so tasty, a bait so tasty that the resistance will be forced to take it, and then leave them into a massive trap or ambush.
Which is it's a very old strategy. Literally it's a mixture of like the Parthian shot and the Mongolian fake retreat. Oh,
Anyway, Adam. Oh,
War
oh, look
Room.
at this. We get mechanics.
Wait,
Page
there's mechanics?
274. I think. Well, there's charts and shit.
That's this actually makes me happy. So the War Room. The War Room is a play aid that tracks the progress of the American insurgency. It has 4 sections that track separate but connected issues: the coin tracker, the signal strength tracker, the signal wars tracker, and the faction loyalty tracker. Oh, okay. The coin tracker. To defeat an occupier, an insurgency needs to achieve the following objectives: win over the local population, win over the international community, keep the insurgency in the fight. The coin counterinsurgency tracker records the progress of these 3 strategic pillars of the insurgency and rates them on a scale of 1 to 10. A campaign begins with each pillar rated at 4. Why? Fuck you. That's why. Throughout the course of the campaign, these ratings will go up or down depending on how well or how poorly the resistance is doing. For the resistance to prevail, all 3 of these pillars must reach 10. However, if all 3 of these pillars fall to 1, the resistance has been crushed. And so this war room thing is just a cheap way
Yeah,
to chart progress.
pretty much. Go to 277 for actual mechanics. The rest is Chad spurging about shit in massive paragraphs.
All right, we're back, and so I think we were talking about signal strength.
Yes. I believe I'll start reading here. Signal strength, and oh, look, we got our nice little chart here. This kind of looks like it might be actual mechanics. The receiver The receivers do not fight alone. The mission they undertake, however important, are but a handful of the concurrent operations taking place in support of larger American insurgency. At any given time, resistance partisans are engaging in espionage, sabotage, psychological operations, ambushes, and defensive actions, all to either ignite the signal or prevent regime forces from smothering it. The signal strength tracker measures the reach and resiliency of the resistance technical network. When signal strength is high, it means that resistance towers, antenna, and repeaters are nearly everywhere, each one defended by armed partisans ready to broadcast the signal at moment's notice. When signal strength is low, it means that the technical infrastructure of the resistance is in shambles, only able to broadcast the signal in short bursts before being jammed or neutralized by the regime.
You know, I know it's near the end of the book, but have you noticed that you could actually cut out the receivers totally from this and make it
Eh,
just a partisan setting?
The thing is, I have a theory about this. Like, originally, it completely lacked the receivers, but then Chad was like, what's popular now? Superheroes! I'll put superheroes in this setting, and I'll make them cyborgs. Yeah, that'll be cool.
And he does nothing with that idea, like none of that Cold War weird stuff they could do. I mean, come on, imagine if you could play as a psychic dolphin that can defuse bombs with your mind.
That would require putting in mechanics, and mechanics are hard work.
Or like a nuclear super mutant with a Davy Crockett bazooka.
As cool as that would be, it's hard work.
Soviet Union ape man that flies around on a jetpack.
Again, hard work. And I have a whole theory about this, but I'll get to that on the next episode. But
Good point.
uh, when it, by extension, signal strength also tracks which side of the war currently has the momentum. When signal strength is high, it means the resistance is close to winning the war. When a signal strength is low, it means the regime is close to winning the war.
I just realized that Chad's writing it like this is a one session wonder sort of game.
Kind of.
That's weird. So,
Uh,
signal strength is rated on a scale of 0 to 6 and derived from values identified on the coin tracker. So, here's some math for you. Here's some legitimate fucking crunch. Each value on the coin tracker coincides with a signal strength value, and the sum of these three values equals the overall signal strength. For example, a campaign begins with all coin tracker values set at 4, each of which translates to one signal strength point. Adding these three together gives us with an overall signal strength of 3. So each signal strength point equals basically 4 points from the previous thing.
Hmm.
If one of the coin tracker values slipped to 3 or less, then its signal strength value slips to 0. Now the overall signal strength is at 2. Alternatively, if one of the coin tracker values is raised to 8 or higher, then its signal strength is increased to 2, bumping the overall signal strength to 4. A little clunky, but hey, it's better than nothing.
It's the fuck it. Ah, shit! I forgot the name of the game. The rip-off Mega Man that got crowdfunded. A Mighty Number Nine,
Yep,
and like
that's
when it
it.
released and it was shit, there was like it's better than nothing.
Oh man. Signal strength is a shortcut for the resistance's momentum, or lack thereof, and it deeply impacts the behaviors and strategic posturing of the resistance factions. These, possi- these possible strategic postures are discussed below. Extreme emergency. The resistance is on the ropes, and the signal is about to be smothered for good. Partisans have lost control of towers. Pirate stations have been raided. Elite BBS have been infiltrated, and I'm suffering brain hemorrhaging to listen to this shit. And repeater networks are in tatters. The signal can only be ignited for short bursts before being jammed, and the political and military praxis of the resistance is severely stunted. And again, Chad is using thesaurus.com. Threatened with extermination by a common enemy, the camaraderie and cohesion among the resistance factions is very high, but their desperation makes them more prone to acts of extremism or cynicism. While the resistance fights for its very life, the receivers will need to make sure that the factional extremists aren't the ones hammering the final nail in the movement's coffin.
Uncertain outcome. It is 3 to 4. It is unclear which way the war is going, but it has become clear that it will continue for a long time. The signal beacons intermittently from a handful of besieged resistance strongholds, and it permeates as far as resistance partisans push it into regime territory. A state of emergency has given way to low intensity conflict and political maneuvering. When resistance partisans are less likely to act out in desperation during this period, the factions are also use its relative stability to begin building up their own power base, sometimes at the larger movement's expense.
Imminent victory, 5 to 6. Cracks in the regime have become chasms. The signal beacons steadily from commercial towers seized by the resistance, and there's little the regime can do to stop it. Also, that sentence is incomplete. GG, Chad. The frequency of liberation is heard in every corner of America and is spreading to other parts of the world. The World Revolution! Freedom Fry soldiers and the regime bureaucrats alike are surrendering or defecting in droves. It is no longer a question whether the resistance will prevail, but rather which of the resistance factions will assume the mantle of leadership. The knives are out, and the revolution is about to end in a negotiated coexistence or a bloody purge.
Oh, we're going full Bolshevik.
We're going pure permanent revolution too, because it's crossing to the world. I get. Oh God, I'm just now envisioning Cyborg Trotsky. This is amazing.
This is the master plan. This is like Metal Gear Solid, where the two old guys with their various schemes, Cyber Trotsky and Oswald Mosley.
Who assassinated Kennedy to make sure that Joe McCarthy won?
Yes. The Signal Wars. Signal Wars, now owned by Disney.
They're gonna make like 5
Uh,
bad movies and then blame the fans.
Signal Surge. All subroutines processed. All exposures wife. Give 'em hell, boys. Signal up. Subroutines online. All exposure wipe. Press the attack. Signal down. Subroutines offline. Tread carefully, comrades. Death squads.
Love it.
Receivers isolated. Death squads inbound. Abort mission.
This I just realized what this shit stain's doing. He's ripping off Tarn Adams' liberal crime squad.
My God.
Because if you take too long in a mission during there, you run into literally death squads in cars.
Oh God, this is like the shitty tabletop adaptation of Liberal Crime Squad.
Yeah, doesn't it feel like that now that you think about it?
Holy shit.
I didn't think of it, and then it just struck in my head the moment I heard Death Squad's Inbound, because that's the part where you shit yourself in fear. I always make a point to run away when I get to stage 1 or 2, because fuck, I don't want to lose my leader. I'd have to start over.
So I'll grab this. If signal strength measures the reach and resiliency of the resistance technical network, the Signal Wars tracker records the tactical battle for the airwaves that begins the moment the resistance starts broadcasting the signal. For every important mission the receivers undertake, there's an off-camera cast of resistance partisans readying themselves to ignite and maintain the signal the second that the receivers tell them to do so.
Ignite.
They
So
also
wait, do they light themselves on fire like that one guy in Washington D.C.? Or are
I
they
don't know,
like
maybe
astropaths from 40K where they ignite their souls to form the beacon?
no, they do secret hand gestures on live TV that get conspiracy nuts worked up.
Oh, and those conspiracy theories come from Pol, and you have random people somehow think it's real.
Fucking QAnon. They also know that the regime is capable of rapidly detecting and responding to broadcasts of the signal, using radio telemetry to identify the location of the offending resistance towers, antennas, and repeaters. This will place the partisans in a pitched battle against the Freedom Fries patrols closing in on them, and the SIG engineers trying to jam the
I
signal.
don't think Chad actually talked about the SIGOPS unless he did and we skipped it. We probably did.
It's like it's buried in like the middle of the plot. Oh yeah, there's an engineering division of the CIA called SIGOPS, but yeah, they're not gonna come up.
So the moment the receivers decide to ignite the signal wars begin. I'm just now envisioning a very depressed Yoda overlooking this. Begone! The signal wars has. And instead
It's
of
like,
a fight between robots and clones, it's a fight between engineers and people and learn to code blue hairs.
da, 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 da.
Duel of the Fates is fucking being played on a kazoo as this tech battle wages.
It's hopeless. The regime has the high ground.
And then they run away like they always do because you can't win.
All right, let's press on.
Yeah, the receivers have their exposure reduced to 0 and their subroutines come online. At the beginning of each round, the GM rolls a d6. If the result is equal to or less than the signal strength, the box in the Signal Wars tracker's up arrow is checked. If the result is greater than the signal strength, a box in the Signal Wars tracker down arrow is checked. Throughout the scene, if the up arrow's boxes are all filled in, the receivers experience a signal surge, which reduces their exposure to 0 and processes each of their subroutines once. Oh my god, so you don't even get to use your powers that often. God damn it, Chad. And all checks from the Signal Wars trackers are removed. If the down arrow boxes are all filled in, the signal is down again. Subroutines are locked, and all checks from the Signal Wars tracker are removed. If the regime takes down the signal after it was ignited during a scene, it changes the contours of Signal Wars. If the resistance manages to fill up the up arrows boxes again, then instead of a signal surge, the signal is merely back up again. Receiver exposure is again reduced to 0. The subroutines are available again. Oh my god, I feel so sorry for Biggie when he runs this shit show.
Well, if he flakes on this, I'll run it.
I feel so fucking sorry for you. But if the down arrows boxes are filled again, the regime's death squads have arrived, and the Signal Wars tracker is no longer in play. By the way, don't you love that only now the death squads are being mentioned?
Like a white van covered in crudely drawn swastikas pulls up, and out comes Ben Garrison, the the regime's most extreme hitman.
No, it's his most dreaded second in command, Tice, and his skulls. They just all
He,
fall out. They just all stumble out of the car, smelling heavily of weed and holding dual gold-plated deagles fucking sideways.
um, folks, if none of you get that reference, look up Deagle Nation. It is quite possibly the funniest internet thing I've ever seen.
It's interesting performance art where an actor plays a schizophrenic man, and it's interesting to say the least.
See, Death Squads! The arrival of a Death Squad not only results in instant mission failure, but now the receivers are fighting for their lives to escape an overwhelming Freedom First Battalion, supported by armor and gunships. A new scene begins, either an evasion scene, the receivers running for their lives, or as a combat scene where the receivers must punch through the fist lines to make it to an evacuation point. What makes these scenes particularly dangerous is that everyone is playing for keeps. Receivers are not permitted to reboot. Ending a turn with 10 or more exposure results in the final and unambiguous death of the receiver.
Don't you love how random chance can just have the death squads appear in like 2 turns?
It can. They like just magically appear.
They were there the entire time, just watching.
That old man that you pass on the way in, actually a Death Squad member. The janitor, Death Squad member. The Death Squad members are everywhere.
It's like you know in those 70s movies where crappy 70s action movies where just like crawl literally out of the buildings and just start acting crazy. I'm just envisioning that. Just an army of Paul Blarts whooping and hollering as they crawl out of everything. City windows, buses, fucking sewer covers, telephone booths. There's like a clown car coming out of an outhouse.
uh, so, faction loyalty. You want to read this?
Yep, I will. While each faction has a humanitarian and revolutionary impulses that led them to join the resistance, they must also contend with the fact that some of their members might be ideological extremists, counter-revolutionary saboteurs, or selfish demagogues who see the movement as a threat to their own political fiefdoms. These elements are exactly the groups that are targeted by the regime's PSYOPS directive, with the aim of aggressively exploiting intrafractional and interfactional fissures in the resistance. PSYOPS will do what it can to empower and embolden these elements, with the hopes that they will cause the resistance to become embroiled in infighting, embrace forms of political violence to alienate potential allies, or even betray the resistance outright to ensure that their vision of utopia will prevail. The receivers, meanwhile, are in a unique position to either bolster faction loyalty to prevent the outcome in the first place, or take on factional dissenters who would harm the movement on the inside. So there's another chart of faction loyalty, which includes all of the four that we covered. Their units are called Minutemen, Tribulators, Vanguards, and Dark Money. And
Um,
oh, they also have the
really-
weird abilities like the Minutemen. They reduce all receivers' exposure by loyalty, or increase all enemies' exposure by loyalty, which is kind of that's actually kind of neat. There's little things like that are pretty neat. Pardon me. Sorry about that. Tribulators, during any
what?
scenes, you add loyalty to the up arrow on the Signal Wars tracker. It cannot be used to negate death squads. Wouldn't that be kind of cool if they could? Like the
Yeah,
army
it
of
would
Paul
be.
Blarts pop out, and then you just see a massive wave of basically peasant fanatics from medieval Total War.
No, 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 no. It's the priest from Brain Dead. I kick ass for the Lord.
And then all of a sudden, an army of flagellants pop out covered in fucking burn marks, eyes wild and foaming at the mouth.
Party gig.
Vanguards, during
Yep.
invasions, they reduce all receivers' exposure by loyalty or add loyalty waypoints to each. So basically, the party just helps you when running away. And dark money during intrigue, i.e., social interaction, because remember, Chad considers that intrigue. Reduce all receiver exposure by loyalty or add loyalty times 4 talking points to a single agenda. So basically, they allow you to bribe people.
The faction loyalty tracker is used to record how loyal each faction is to the resistance movement, and by extension, how helpful their partisans are and how resilient they are to PSYOPs machinations. Each faction has a loyalty score ranked on a scale of 0 to 5. A faction with 5 loyalty is a crucial resistance partner with highly capable operatives that are instrumental in supporting the movement's objectives. A faction with 0 loyalty is no longer part of the resistance. It has either surrendered to or been exterminated by the resistance, or it has been forcefully expelled by the regime by the resistance because the movement could no longer abide its actions. At the beginning of a new campaign, all factions have their loyalty set at 3.
So throughout the campaign, PSYOPS is working overtime to degrade the faction's loyalty to the movement. One tried and true technique is to covertly prop up, and in some cases arm the most radical and reactionary members of a faction, and then provoke them into committing atrocities. So basically false flag operations. Not only does this exacerbate a faction's intra-factional squabbling, gotta love those big boy words, don't you, Chad? Thereby reducing its effectiveness against the regime, but it also strengthens the regime's argument that the resistance is not a legitimate people's movement, but rather a terrorist organization that no one, neither among the local population nor in the international community, can associate with. I'm actually going to count how long this fucking sentence is. Oh, it's as long as a paragraph, not surprising. Chad, learn to use periods. With another technique is to promote interfactional conspiracies to turn the factions against one another. While the factions won't directly turn on each other while the regime presents an existential threat, they will begin to dig in, bolstering their own positions instead of supporting the movement's goals. Lastly, the regime regularly commits atrocities against the people, provoking members of the resistance into countering with their own violent retributions, which may involve actions that defy the rules of a thing that isn't fucking possible to have. While PSYOPs medals, the receivers are in a position to bolster the loyalty to the factions or prevent their worst excesses. So that would be yours.
Uh, yep. One moment. Oh, during Sigmata's strategic phase, the GM gets to invoke a loyalty check on a single faction of her choice. She rolls a d6. If the result is equal to or less than the faction's loyalty, that faction gains a wave, and the receivers are permitted to go on any of the missions described on the faction favor sheet, all of which increase a single faction's loyalty by 1 if the mission is successful. Look at that, actual mechanics here. If the result is greater than the faction's loyalty, members of that faction begin to engage in the behaviors described on the faction fallout sheet, which vary in severity based on signal strength. If the receivers go on a mission to prevent this outcome, that faction loyalty is reduced by 1 point regardless or of whether or not the receivers are successful. If the receivers allow the faction fallout scenario to occur on their watch, the faction's loyalty remains intact, but the resistance movement takes a hit on the coin tracker.
Gotta love that forced punishment that actually. Notice something awful about this. Notice that it's actually harder to keep them loyal than it is because it actually punishes you for succeeding. You regardless will have a lower loyalty, and because it goes over, that's bad. That's awful for you. Because the
Uh,
lower you get, the easier it is for them to just leave. And there's nothing you can do about it.
if a faction's loyalty ever drops below 1, it is no longer part of the resistance. Whether it has been wiped out, pledged its allegiance to the regime, or been banished from the resistance is determined by the events that have been occurring in the campaign's story
Actually,
space.
it's entirely possible to lose all of the factions. Chad, what
So
the
then,
fuck?
hmm, I don't think there's any actual rules for. There's no actual rules if you lose anything. Like, do you lose?
The only thing I think you lose the abilities that they give you. So, like, let's
Yeah.
say if the party is purged, you won't get bonuses to exposure during evasions.
And, huh.
So, what you're saying is it's entirely possible that all of the factions will be dead. Then who's leading?
You
How is the
are.
resistance continuing?
No, the players take over the resistance and lead it to victory.
What the fuck? What might make more sense is that if you ignore their demands for a while, then they lose loyalty because you're not listening to them or not helping them or something like that, you know?
Yeah, but nope, gotta skew it so that you fail. You
Or
gotta
maybe
fail,
if they're since
just
they're
like me.
since they're opposites of each other, maybe you have to balance who you help. Like if you help the old men, the party, not the party, the faith dislike you a bit more because you're helping a bunch of crazed, fucking libertarians. If you help the party, the old men are like you're helping goddamn commies.
And the makers aren't going to be too happy about that. See, there's some shit that could actually be done with this, and Chad fucks it up.
Like the time. This is why he doesn't do crunch. I think because of things like that. I think he does. You think he knows that on some level he's really bad at writing crunch?
Think so. And like he just covers it up with put all the splat in. Gotta talk about my radios.
Oh God. So, do we want to
Eh,
read about waves?
Yeah, this is some of this is actually vaguely interesting. So
You
let's
do
go
have a
through this.
point. Yeah, so waves. So waves are resistance partisans from each of the factions that have been assigned to support the receivers during their missions. So effectively, these are your red shirts, or if you're a new next generation fan, your gold shirts. They can be utilized during missions to achieve spectacular outcomes, but they are a limited resource. A campaign begins with each faction contributing one wave to the cause. Oh, so you don't even. Oh, okay. When a wave is used, it is gone, but the receivers earn more through successful loyalty checks, which represent productive recruiting efforts, and by performing favors for the factions. But below, the four different types of waves are discussed. Dark money. Do you want to take that or me?
Yeah, sure. When it comes to social political forces that influence the individual's behavior, ideology has nothing on money. The ultimate victory of capitalism is money's ability to convince even the most deeply entrenched ideologue to make temporary exceptions to virtually anything, so long as the price is right. And when the economy is in shambles or deeply skewed towards those who are already wealthy, that price is cheap.
So,
Okay,
Chad,
so
I think, did read up on Warlord period China, given he's a Mao fanboy. Did you know that there is a term during that period called the silver bullet?
and that's referring to the Mexican silver dollars that were in use as currency, right?
Pretty much. The idea was that you can completely demolish an army just by bribing the general. Like it
and
was easy to just have armies completely turn on you just by just by bribing them. There's a reason why one of the more effective warlords was the gangster governor of Jiangxi, Big Ear Du, because due to his mafia triad ties, he earned enough money he could actually pay his soldiers reasonably well. So they were one of the few factions that were hard to bribe since they already got good pay.
Well, looks like Chad did read this because that's basically the rule for this. During a scene of intrigue, a player can forfeit her receiver's turn and instead leverage a wave of dark money. This wave can be used to do one of two things: reduce all receiver exposure by a value equal to the maker's loyalty score, or acquire a number of talking points equal to the maker's loyalty score times 4 towards a single agenda. She then narrates what this intervention looks like in the story space. Examples of dark money intervention could include duffel bags full of unmarked bills, manila envelopes containing compromising photographs, phone calls made to managers or lieutenant who will vouch for uninvited guests, or otherwise ruthless agents who are suddenly incurious or bad at their job for reasons unknown.
Minutemen. Minutemen are resistance partisans that can be mobilized to carry out offensive and defensive military actions against the regime forces at a moment's notice. Some are uniformed guerrillas, but most are people who masquerade as tax-paying, law-abiding loyalists. When they get the phone call from regional command or see an emergency manifesting before them, they can ready themselves for action. Heavily armed and trained in small unit tactics, Minutemen are ready and willing to engage the enemy whenever or wherever they are needed. But because they're a bunch of 3%ers, they suck shit at actually doing anything resembling army work. During the scene of combat, a player can choose to forfeit her receiver's turn and instead leverage a wave of Minutemen. Literally the Zap Brannigan strategy of just throwing men at the enemy until their kill count overloads. This wave can be used to do one of two things: reduce all receiver exposure by a value equal to the old man's loyalty scores, or increase the exposure to all threats by the same value. She then narrates what this intervention looks like in the story space. Examples of Minutemen intervention include the emergence of a lone sniper providing overwatch, a dramatic arrival of the cavalry rolling in on a fucking pickup truck, dueling
That's
banjos
awesome.
playing, a citizen ramming their car into a fist APC, or a mob of people swarming the neo-Nazi aggressors. Uh,
That's awesome.
just it instant. That should be a power the receivers get. Summon angry mob.
Tribulators. Radical bishops of the faith has issued edicts preemptively absolving any sin committed to keep the signal alive during the resistance's most important ideals. Tribulators are those who have taken this edict to heart. These operatives are spies, saboteurs, sleeper agents, and suicide commandos who have infiltrated virtually every segment of secular society, including the organizations that comprise the regime. At the behest of a radical bishop, they would execute with frightening zeal and with conduct that could only be permissible during the end of days.
Execute Order
During
66.
During any scene, a player can choose to forfeit her receiver's turn and instead leverage a wave of tribulators. This wave adds a number of points to the Signal Wars tracker's up arrow equal to the faith's loyalty score. Tribulator intervention typically happens off camera, so you can't see the brutal aftermath or the carnage of a suicide bomber. So you can go to sleep with a clean conscience.
Remember,
And it
ethical terrorism. Ethical terrorism.
epic means just ignore it. It's off camera and involves profoundly violent and unexpected attacks on the regime's military forces and technical infrastructure. The receivers rarely see tribulators firsthand. They only know of their successes when the signal suddenly comes back online or surges. However, across town, a sleeper agent pulls out a gun and assassinates her SIGOPS colleagues, jamming the signal. Or a vehicle borne improvised explosive device is driven into a column of fist APCs closing in on the Resistance pirate radio station. The player who chooses this wave need not define its narrative elements immediately if she doesn't want to. She can instead describe it after the mission in the form of news reports about shocking acts of terrorism committed by the Resistance.
So I just love how chat's not even hiding the fact that they just commit atrocities.
But they're off camera atrocities, so it's okay.
So last but not least, the vanguards. Work that isn't done by the microchip is done by workers, many of whom are members of the party. These vanguards dutifully toil as drivers, heavy equipment operators, service workers, assemblers, miners, and material handlers, awaiting the day where they'll be able to put their facility access and insider knowledge to work for the resistance. Whether it's through mechanical sabotage, smuggling, general strike, or commandeering company property, the seized means of production will aid the people, and also allow them to starve to death. During a scene of evasion, I thought these guys were intrigue, but okay. A player can choose to forfeit her receiver's turn and instead leverage a wave of vanguards. Chad Walker did not look over this before doing this.
No, no, this was evasion. Uh,
I thought they did intrigue though.
no, no, no. The makers did intrigue.
Oh yeah, you're right. I'm wrong. This wave can be used to do one of two things: reduce all receiver exposure by a value equal to the party's loyalty scores, or increase the waypoints of each receiver by the same value. She then narrates what this intervention looks like in the story space. Examples of Vanguard intervention include a worker leaving a door unlocked or an alarm system deactivated, a truck driver smuggling the receivers past a checkpoint. I honestly did not expect to see the fucking word longshoreman in here, but okay. A longshoreman accidentally backing a forklift into a guard post, or a conveniently timed general strike that creates a distraction. Uh, I'm not joking. I'm surprised Chad used the word longshoreman.
That's a dock worker, right?
Yeah, it's an old-timey term for dock worker that I haven't seen since 1937.
Oh God.
Oh, the Great Betrayal.
Oh boy.
Is this a
Okay.
description of this chapter in general, since this is supposed to be Crunch?
Betrayal. If and when it becomes obvious to all sides of the American insurgency that the resistance is on the cusp of ultimate victory, the political and strategic calculus of the war undergoes a dramatic shift.
He
With the
spelled
regime.
calculus wrong. He clearly wanted to finish this book.
Regime no longer a viable threat, the factions begin positioning themselves to either assume the mantle of leadership or to prevent another faction from co opting the movement for their own. What makes this state of affairs so incredibly dangerous is the fact that the remnants of the regime, including Freedom Fist battalions and legions of bureaucrats who run state functions, begin their own political maneuvering. They seek to throw their lot in with the faction that is most likely to assume power. The dust has settled, if only to stay alive, stay relevant, or stay in power. It's the equivalent of pouring gasoline on a fire.
Or also a way to describe this book in general.
Yeah, pretty much. You want to grab this?
Okay, so the leadership of each faction knows full well that whomever inherits the remnants of the regime will be in a position to rebuild America into their own version of utopia. Of course, one faction's utopia could very well be another faction's hell on earth. Two political threads that follow this dilemma. Publicly, the leaders of the factions reaffirm their loyalty to the resistance and continue negotiating what their peaceful coexistence will look like during the rebuilding process that follows the war. It's a strained conversation, but that much was always expected. Privately, however, they engage in a bidding war to pull regime defectors and reformed fascists into their own ranks, knowing full well that the faction that makes the most concessions to them and promises a utopia most amenable to their ideology will win their loyalty. So, don't you love that even when you win, the fascists still win? Because the
Oswald.
winner is the ones that steal the most fascists from the others.
Just like World War II and Operation Paperclip.
The fucking difference was we were taking scientists, not not like politicians and shit.
but obviously, if we took politicians, we'd be better off. So saith Chad Walker.
Uh, do you think the ghost of Oswald Mosley is telling him to write this book?
Probably. No. Oswald Mosley was 25 steps ahead of everybody and specifically left a diary that would brainwash Chad Walker into writing this book.
I'm
And
just
then
now
he cut.
I'm just now envisioning Oswald Mosley as a Hellboy villain.
And then Oswald Mosley cut off his left hand and replaced it with Solid Snake's clone and then pretended to be hypnotized.
Oh god. Once the signal strength tracker determines that the war has reached the imminent victory phase, a failed loyalty check results in a faction transforming into the authoritarian antithesis of its humanitarian revolutionary impulses, effectively becoming the new regime. So it only takes one failure, one failed loyalty check, and they just instantly turn into monsters.
Oh god. Did, is that okay? Stop when you fail a loyalty check. So theoretically, you could have all four of them just utterly fuck up.
All four of them instantly become authoritarian nightmares, including the libertarian one. To ensure their power and preempt any actions that the remainder of the resistance is likely to take against them, they execute a sudden and shocking purge, Order 66, played out in a series of ambushes, assassinations, violent mutinies, and summary executions. Once they have neutralized those members of their own factions who would never throw in with the fascists, they move on to their greatest rivals. What the fuck? When the GM is choosing which faction might carry out the Great Betrayal, faction loyalty plays into her spelled calculus wrong again.
No, this is the Rick and Morty viewer's way to spell calculus. You need a very high IQ to understand this spelling of calculus.
The problem is that I think they learned that they needed a high IQ on opposite day. So, a faction with high loyalty is less likely to actually fail a loyalty check and turn on the resistance. However, and perhaps cruelly, the more loyal a faction was to the resistance, the more damaging its great betrayal is to the movement. Prior to the Great Betrayal, those factions with low loyalty were held at arm's length, never fully trusted, and never really given a seat at the table. Their strategic discipline and commitment to the cause were always questioned, so they were kept in the dark about many operational secrets, and there were numerous contingency plans accounting for their possible betrayal. We all knew this day would come. There's no way that, of course, the capitalists are the ones that would, of course, the makers would be the ones that do this, would ever let go of their grip on power. Those factions with high loyalty, on the other hand, were the most trusted and influential members of the movement. They gave their all to combat the regime, helped the receivers survive their most dangerous ordeals, and were trusted with the resistance's most sensitive operational secrets. No one saw their betrayal coming. I Oh wow, and I like how it's the communists that are doing the party that's doing the purging. I can't believe this is happening, comrades. On the eve of victory, the tankies set fire to the whole thing. Translation: this is Chad openly acknowledging his tendency to never want to win. Chad hates winning.
If and when the Great Betrayal happens, the local population, international community, and resistance fighters score on the coin tracker each plummet by a value equal to the betraying faction's loyalty. Regardless of which faction does the betrayal, matters get worse. The remaining loyal faction with the highest loyalty score is eradicated in the purge and effectively removed from the resistance. Flip a coin in case of a tie. Some of its members remain, but the faction as an organized political force is essentially dead. Finding of the Great Betrayal is that the surviving factions coalesce into a single faction, the People. The People is a conglomeration of the Great Betrayal survivors. Their loyalty remains at an otherwise impossible 6, and instead of making loyalty check during the strategic phase, the GM simply gives them 2 waves. These waves can be used to replicate the effects of Minutemen, Vanguards, Dark Money, or Tribulators. The unpredictable and dark nature of the Great Betrayal, your table should discuss whether or not your campaign will even include it as a possibility. As with any game mechanic or thing, but what game mechanics?
The
Or
the the, the 2 or 3 pages he actually wrote.
thematic content, if it does not sit right with your table, don't use it.
That should be the average sentence in this book. Just don't use it. Don't use this book.
I think we can get through missions. We'll just focus on the tables because that's the interesting stuff. And
Yeah. Oh wait, no, there's the picture.
yeah,
So we have a road trip filled with gay robots in, I guess, Miami, based on the palm trees.
this is a really weird movie adaptation of my Hotline Miami.
Also, this is a woke superhero team in modern day Marvel. Notice that there is only one man in the group, and he cannot be white because white man bad.
No, I think there's two. Like guy driving and the guy behind him.
Oh, that's supposed to be a guy.
I don't know. It's a person of ambiguous gender.
All I know is this. This is the most racist image I've seen. Or, well, not really, but you know what I mean. It really highlights that racist attitude a lot of people who think that diversity is just shoving minorities into the front like this is.
No, you can't have. You gotta put in some black guys in there, make it more diverse. Oh, we don't have any black guys on set. Well, we'll just Photoshop a few guys in. Nobody's gonna notice.
Oh, you mean like that one college up in the Midwest?
Yes.
Lord. So we're skipping strategic phase, thank God.
Yep. Blah blah blah. Regime actions, and this is basically what the regime does
Ah,
during
here we
a.
go.
Yep.
So we have rules here. There's also a helpful list of what the abbreviations mean. IC is
International.
yep.
Yep. International community. LP is local population. RF equals resistance fighters. Action impact scores provided are just suggestions. Change them to fit your story.
I'm surprised he actually has any numbers.
All
So
right, regime actions. I'll get the top three and we'll cycle it out from there.
okay.
Logistics. The regime is mobilizing for a major offensive or the transfer of something or someone of immense high value. High ranking captives, ordnance, prototypes, narcotics, pallets of cash, video evidence of an atrocity, a captured receiver, blah, 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 blah.
So -1
This
local
leads
population, so some purging. A purge of resistance fighters and the international community hates them more. Or something.
CI investigation to identify enemy of the states. CI has launched a major probe.
I think
They have begun
I think that's the IOPS.
launch. Yeah, they have begun canvassing neighborhoods, interviewing informants, interrogating prisoners, tapping phone lines, reading mail, watching surveillance footage. -1 local population, -1 RF. Moles, a rash of setbacks and failed operations suggest that the resistance has been infiltrated by IOPS assets. Tempers flare and accusations fly. If someone doesn't find the informant soon, the local resistance will tear itself apart.
So, sanitation operations. The regime begins to organize a blackout perimeter in order to discreetly massacre a large group. Once journalists are muzzled, communication lines are severed, and points of egress are blocked. You just entry points, jackass. The death squads will arrive and begin their work. -1 to the international community. How?
Because,
If you're
no.
censoring it, how the fuck do they even know?
No, they blame the massacre on the resistance,
Oh,
obviously.
at -2 local population, so that makes sense. Raids. The Freedom Fries execute raids on resistance strongholds and safe houses, as well as the private proper. I just realized, yeah, he is ripping off Liberal Crime Squad. This is your average police and army raid, you fucking shit stain. As well as the private property of suspected resistance sympathizers, neutralizing all those who resist and processing those who surrender. So -3 resistance. Paramilitaries, i.e., arming soccer hooligans with knives. PsyOps is tasked to hooligan groups, oh god, with tormenting marginalized communities, organizing neo-Nazi rallies, and carrying out extrajudicial kidnappings, tortures, and executions of known resistance sympathizers. -1 to the local population, and -1 to the international community.
Everything is fine.
Just sitting there in your burning building. It's just fine.
Loyalist operators organize an event to increase regime support, fundraise for hate group PACs, fawn over the freedom first, and or and or put on a family friendly face on fascist ideology. Say that three times quick. It's Adolf the Friendly Mouse. That's their new mascot. Hey kids, racial purity is an imperative.
I was going to go with since they're supporting neo Nazis and Hitler was a clear wolfaboo, Rudolph the Wolf.
It'll be a shame if someone crashes this event. Hint, 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 hint.
And local
One
population.
inter.
I like how
Yep.
despite this they lose the local population. I imagine that's support.
No, I think that's the resistance's support. So yeah, it turns the local population against the resistance.
I was just envisioning more like these everything is fine events, just like a bunch of people show up to party and then like half of them get violently gunned down by the regime.
Skunk works. The regime is nearing completion of a facility, infrastructure project, forward base, or some technology rollout that stands to severely disrupt the resistance, either locally, regionally, or nationally. -2 resistance fighters. It makes sense.
It, it,
Propag-
I'm sorry, it's just the Skunk Works. I think he stole that from the name of the corporation that built the Higgins boat.
they also made the SR-71.
Yeah.
Propaganda. PsyOps plans a propaganda push to tarnish the resistance's legitimacy, vilify a marginalized community, or to distract the public from a narrative, current or forthcoming, that threatens to sour the public's opinion of the regime. -1 international community, -1 LP.
Oh, hey, a word that Chad found in dictionary.com. Emoluments. The regime is using threats, bribes, blackmail, and force to steal the wealth, land, and/or autonomy of a political bloc. We just call that seizures usually. Trade union, journalist association, indigenous group, church, or private entity it considers insufficiently loyal. -2 local population. Parley. Representatives of the regime requests a secret meeting with resistance leaders to negotiate a prisoner exchange, a conditional surrender, a temporary ceasefire, or a defection. It could very well be a trap or turn into a bloodbath if negotiations sour. -1 resistance fighters. And last but not least, the false flag. PsyOps has tasked hooligan groups with carrying out a particularly shocking, grisly, and unprovoked operation, but in a manner that implicates the resistance that's the perpetrators. The resistance must prevent the operations or expose the truth.
So, wait, you're saying that a bunch of drunk football fans are somehow intelligent to pull off a conspiracy at that level?
According to Chad, yes.
All right, so we go in and we whack him with the baseball bat, and then Ed over here is gonna say, "We're from the resistance."
Right then, mates. Now, what we's gonna do is we's gonna kick the shit out of that store that kicked us out, and then we're gonna write, "Party was here," right? Yeah. If we do that, then they won't know that it was us that did it.
Yeah, wait, party is PURTR, right?
Nah, you bloody idiot. It's PARTZY. Partzy.
Got
At
it.
least I think it is.
I don't know, I need some more Coors Light.
Fuck that. Where's my scotch?
Resistance action. Oh, and now we get your missions. So the previous ones are disrupting missions, and then your counters.
I imagine this is like that strategy turn thing that Chad just came up with right now at the end of the book.
Yeah, this is. It's basically regime action, then resistance action, then loyalty checks, and repeat that and on until somebody wins.
It's like he looked at
Uh,
the kingdom building mechanics for Pathfinder and didn't really understand that that's a thing that's optional.
Sigmata. Someone in the region just experienced the Sigmata. The receivers need to find them before the regime does. Alternatively, they need to follow up on rumors of a monster or gifted person who might be one of their own. +1 resistance fighters. Ultimatum. The regime has rejected a formal demand to release prisoners, pull their forces out of contested territory, or stop targeting non-combatants. The resistance must make good on their threat. The world is watching. +2 RF, plus
I like
2
how
no.
they're acting like they're sovereign nations now for some reason.
Oh, repeat the signal. Game tagline. To extend the signal to a new region or strengthen it in where it has faltered, the resistance needs to smuggle radio equipment into enemy territory and install it in strategic locations, all while evading SIGOPS detection and Freedom Fries confiscation. +2 LP, +1.
You also forgot the -5 sand damage that it causes because it's Chad's autism. So,
The entire
tribunal.
mission is
Oh,
just 30 minutes of real life time of the GM describing various models of 1980s ham radios.
if Chad's DMing, it almost certainly is, along with him bitching about, you know, it was better back in the day, internet. It prevented stupid people from using it. So, a tribunal. A traitor or war criminal among the resistance has refused to face a tribunal to answer for his crimes. He must face justice if the resistance wishes to maintain any semblance of accountability, due process, and ethical principles. You get in a lot of things. Comrades in arms, a raid, ambush, or riot has escalated into all-out warfare. The how or why it started it no longer matters. It's time for the resistance partisans to press the attack, hold their ground, or evacuate immediately. Wait, Chad, this is conventional warfare. Why are we doing this?
Because fuck you.
Demonstration. The resistance is organizing a mass demonstration to assure the public and the world that the movement is legitimate, alive, and has popular support. They must be ready for a legion of statists, saboteurs, and shock troops hoping to disrupt the event. They also have to bus in people to make the demonstration bigger than it actually is.
Reconnaissance. Intelligence to be gathered in hostile or unknown territory, which may include the remote wilderness, the abandoned ruins of a large scale battle, or from within the ranks of a seemingly neutral organization whose true agenda is unknown. Plus 1 RF. Sabotage. The resistance has identified an opportunity to cripple Freedom Fist or IOPS operations locally, regionally, or nationally by sabotaging a facility, infrastructure project, or technology prototype. Plus, plus 1 LP, plus 1 RF. Comrades must be liberated from the clutches of the regime. It will involve a daring prison break, organizing a prisoners' revolt, or interdirecting prisoner transport as they travel between jails, wait stations, and processing centers. Plus 1 LC, plus 1 LP, plus 1 RF.
Geez, these are just pretty standard. Recruitment. Resistance agents have identified a powerful, influential, or well-connected individual, organization, or nation as a potential ally. They'll need their best assets to make contact, assess their motives, and close the deal if necessary. You gain a lot if you can pull this one out of your butt. Forward base. A new resistance cell deep within Loyalist territory needs help during its nascent phase. They'll need help recruiting and training partisans, identifying high-value targets, establishing supply lines, and evading Freedom Fry security sweeps. And you get some recruitments if you succeed in that. And infiltration. A high-security facility needs to be infiltrated in order to acquire important intelligence, destroy a damning document, gain an audience with an exclusive person, and blah, the fucking blah. You gain a recruitment point from that, too.
On 297, this is where we get into the faction favors, which is going to be
Boring.
interesting because
It's gonna be boring. I'm starting to fade, man.
uh,
Ugh, fuck it. Let's at least finish this.
let's get the party because they're actually funny. The party, no vacancy. And our anal chests have occupied unused properties to shelter squatters and refugees. Now the owner wants to demolish the place because people are shitting and throwing used needles everywhere.
And on
The
top of
resist-
that, there's like a dozen dead bodies in the fucking place because no one's cleaning it out.
Come on, you jackasses! I pay for this goddamn place. I pay the electricity bills, and you guys are living here free. All right. Look, I just want to send my goddamn kid to college, and I don't want to have a bunch of jackasses ruining my property.
Fuck you. You're not my dad.
All right, Chad, this is it. I'm calling the cops.
No, wait. No, dad. No.
The resistance needs to rally the people to the defense of vulnerable peoples like drug addicts and just alternatives to capitalism.
I.e., squatting in a place that's owned by someone else.
Fuck you! I want what you have.
So, holding the line. Workers have seized a production facility that supports the regime's war-sustaining efforts. The bosses want their company men, scabs, and modern-day Pinkertons. Does he even know what that means? Does Chad even know what Pinkerton usually means?
Well, they did work as strikebreakers.
Yeah, but they were more famous as detectives, though.
Um, I don't know.
To,
Blah, vocabulary, blah.
to clean the mess
It
before the
works.
regime finds out that they've lost control. So basically, helping the workers fuck over a company because reasons. Tankies,
Yankee
fuck off.
off.
That's
Oh
yours.
no.
That's yours, man.
Here, espousing leftist values is actually inflicting status and nationalist tyranny on the underclass to enrich himself and his bourgeoisie allies. So it's Maduro. You gotta kill Maduro.
You got a churro the Maduro.
The means of production must be seized from this capitalist and comrades close. Which one? Like, literally every goddamn communist state has turned into this.
I'm just now envisioning, because it's not specific, it's not like there's a corrupt asshole in the party that's doing it. You literally have to storm Cuba to murder Raul Castro.
And should we do the faction fallout or save that
I'm
for
starting
next
to
week?
revive, so I want to finish at least this, and then we'll call it. I think. So, is the old men interesting? Nah, it's just wait.
Yeah, kind of. It's Last Stand where you
Sorry
go
for the
all
mic
climb
bump.
up.
Bug tried to get into my eye.
On 299 is the faction fallout, and that's interesting.
Um, yeah, all right. At least let's go into Fallout for the these old men last stand. So the Minutemen attack and/or take over public utilities, government administration offices, and other soft targets of the state in a futile attempt to cripple the regime and awaken more patriots. Um,
Pulling a, they're pulling a Clive and Bundy.
yeah, they're pulling a Clive and Bundy / Waco. I actually don't know why this would be considered a failure, given that you do the same goddamn thing for the party. Remember, no
Uh,
vacancy.
because it's the bad guys doing it. I mean, our unwoke allies.
Our allies are doing it without telling us.
Uncertain outcome. Sovereignty. Fringe elements within the old men begin devoting resistance personnel, propaganda, and resources towards establishing sovereign states, rural fiefdoms that hoard supplies, engage in banditry, and feud over property rights with other sovereigns. Oh my god, literally, am I being detained?
Just a bunch of soft sits spurging at each other, doing nothing. Oh hey, ethnostate. Finding agreement in the tenets of nativism, the old men establish a strategic alliance with the regime and act immediately to eradicate another faction that threatens to take power once the resistance has won. So I just realized I think the way it works is that oh no, I get it. The way it works is the more you win, the worse the effects are in some ways.
Yeah. I mean, that's thing. Holy War. Radical bishops of the faith issue an edict approving suicide terrorism as a means of punishing the civilian population, which they see as complicit in the persecution and eradication of the faithful.
But they do that already.
This time it's even worse.
So dominionism. Radical bishops of the faith call for the annexation of territory to establish and expand God's dominion, a brutal religious state where puritanical enforcers stone adulteresses, castrate homosexuals, and crucify abortionists. The problem is, yeah, there's crazies out there like that, but there's not a lot of them in the U.S.
Alternative universe. Fuck you. Christofascism.
So basically, Phalangist Spain.
Finding agreement in the need for the state to purge moral degeneracy, the faith establishes a strategic alliance with the regime and acts immediately to eradicate another faction that threatens to take power once the resistance has won.
Oh, these are the Great Betrayal events.
Yeah,
Huh.
get vanguardism. Militants within the party begin a campaign of political assassination, targeting bankers, business owners, and political pundits it considers counter-revolutionaries.
I like that uniquely this actually pisses off the makers.
Oh shit, it does.
It's unique out of every one of these. Look at it.
Fuck. Like, why couldn't the other ones have that? Like the faith pisses off the old men because they're targeting random people.
Or yeah, or they're blaming the citizens when the old men are like, "Nah, it's not the citizens, it's the government, dude."
Or like the makers thing decreases the party loyalty. I mean that's actually a little bit interesting, but of course our glorious party is gonna piss off those evil capitalists.
I kind of like that vanguardism thing. Red imperialism. Russophiles within the party begin devoting resistance personnel, propaganda, and resources towards supporting Soviet imperialist adventure. Revolutionary fervor dwindles as the party is co-opted by Kremlin apologists. Wow.
I like how I like how all the bad stuff from the party is just it's because they're not following real communism.
The best part about all of this is that there's no difference between your average union worker and a fucking tanky.
Apparently.
Even though I can tell you that there's other far left ideologies if you want to borrow from them. My favorite one, courtesy of Kaiserreich, is syndicalism. So, last but not least, neo-Stalinism. Oh boy, neo-Stalinism.
Oh, this will be good.
Taking their
Dig
cue from the Bolsheviks, the party establishes a strategic alliance with the regime and acts immediately to eradicate other faction that threatens to take. Oh, it's not as interesting as I thought. Once the
Oh,
resistance is won, that's lame.
Flight of the Elites is like literally, fuck you, we're out of here. The makers begin fleeing to neutral countries in Europe, liquidating all their assets and exfiltrating as much wealth and expertise as humanly possible on the way out. They'll be sure to return once all the fighting stops, though.
Which is normal. Free market loyalty. The makers begin devoting resistance personnel, propaganda, and resources to protect their own assets and enterprises. Resistance cells begin doing whatever it takes to ensure that the makers' money keeps flowing, so they become private guards.
Oligarchy. To ensure the anarcho capitalist utopia that they have been fighting
All
for,
of them.
the the makers established a strategic alliance with the regime to establish a fascist anarcho capitalist utopia.
Like I said, the factions would make more sense if you spliced the makers and the old men if you want like a libertarian group. Then you have the faithful, which is like a people's church sort of thing. And then you have the party just being your people ranging from social democrats to hardcore fucking positists.
And with that, I think this chapter is pretty much done. Like, there's a few little bits and shit,
There's
but
an example of what happens in there, and there's missions and stuff, and when things go south. But
yeah. And after that, it's just the outro and some special bits. So, yeah, this is the penultimate actual episode of Sigmata.
yeah, there's really not much left other than like the character sheets, and if you guys want, we can cover some of the missions. But honestly, we're getting close to wrapping this thing up, preferably in a body bag so we can dump it in the Hudson River.
Belongs. Anyway, I'm Randall.
And I'm Adam, and fuck you guys, good night.